Welcome to the Scoop. I am Farah,
And I'm Nicole.
and today is about can you guess?
What is accountability?
Accountability. I'm accountable. Are you accountable, Nicole?
Yes,
Oh,
try my
great.
best.
I try. I try. I'll give it that effort. All right. So this is one of our values, and we're really excited to talk about what that means to you and what that means to me and Nicole, and what that means to Sonnenberg Consultants, because it is one of our values.
Accountability means to me being proactive and accepting responsibility for your actions and progress.
Okay. To me, accountability means taking responsibility for the things that you say you're going to do, the things that you offer to take control of or guide others in completing. It's a character trait that really has a lot to do with taking responsibility, taking leadership, and also just stepping up to make sure things get done, things are followed through on, and things are completed to what the standard is.
So accountability for me means taking initiative to own up to your mistakes or making sure that you're including yourself as part of the team. So, for example, if you do make a mistake, letting the team know right away, and then also brainstorming ideas with the team to ensure that you're not only owning up to that mistake, but also finding a solution to fix whatever mistake may have happened.
Hi! Accountability to me is being able to be held responsible for your actions and stuff. And the most important for me is during like crisis debriefing and allowing like supervisors, seniors, BCBAs, and other staff as well, holding you accountable to the things that you did or things that we can work on and everything.
Okay, so Nicole, what does accountability mean to you?
I think you can't have accountability without having some integrity. And I think accountability is a way to do what you say that you're going to do, and to hold others to responsibility and ownership over the parts that they play on the team.
Agree.
What does accountability mean to you?
Accountability means to me, I agree with the integrity piece. I think in order to be accountable, there's definitely that piece there. Accountability to me is when something doesn't go the way that you want it to go. That so it's kind of the negation side of it, the not of just owning up to it and saying, yeah, I dropped the ball. I will, what can I do next time? Or let me do this next time. So I think of just to piggyback on what you said, that's what accountability means to me. I think it's easy to be accountable when you've done and you have integrity. I think the part that gets harder is when you've dropped it and you it's easier to point to somebody else and deflect. So I think that's where I would love to focus. Do you want to let us know what the value by definition and see if we hit it for Sonnenberg?
Yeah, sure. So, our definition of accountability is that we set boundaries and hold ourselves and others to them in ways that are consistent with our Sonnenberg values.
I think we hit it. I
Yeah.
think that's good. It's boundaries. We didn't talk about that too much, but boundaries also, I would say, with us is if we can't do something or we can't get to that or we are unable to because it's not our area, is to withhold and have integrity to communicate that and be accountable that that's something that you're unable to do or you're not sure, to communicate about that so you can have integrity and as it relates to your team. I think with our other values, team building or teamwork, that would also play into that. Would you agree with that piece? Because I think that's where the boundaries piece comes in.
Yeah, I think that the boundaries piece also comes with accountability and that like integrity and transparency, responsibility, ownership. Those are kind of all words that kind of play together. And so if you set a boundary, then you have a responsibility to uphold that boundary. So if I say, well, I have to do everything for everybody else, does that mean that I'm breaking my boundaries, and then am I holding others accountable for their part in the team?
I like that.
Because I hear that sometimes. It's like, well, if I don't do it, then no one's going to do it. And to me that means that we're not communicating to other key players to make sure that we hold them accountable as well as ourselves and our own boundaries.
Hmm. That's well said. I like that a lot. And that can be sometimes very challenging, and sometimes can come across maybe that you're not holding yourself accountable when you actually are, because you're holding other members accountable. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the boundaries piece of that. So, yeah, I like that a lot. I didn't think about it that way, as in relation to boundaries with the way that you said that. And I do like that. So I think that brings in, other values, which is why all of our values kind of are intertwined, because it is a lot about communication and order, which is again another value that we'll talk about in another episode, is to communicate that the team has these goals, as in relation to each other. And in order to hold that boundary and for you to be accountable, I, to communicate about whatever it is that teammate is responsible for. Because that also is, I didn't think about it this way, but that makes you accountable by communicating, oh, I need you to do XYZ so I can finish it to do my piece of that. Again, teamwork, communication, integrity, and that would help with those boundaries, and both parties, both departments, both teammates being accountable. I like that because I don't think that that's what it's looked like a lot of the time. That kind of really makes me think a little bit differently, of holding your teammate accountable, right?
Yeah, I think it goes into feedback too, because sometimes feedback is maybe seen as too much or too little feedback, or that wow, I get feedback all the time, and so that is constructive, and that may have a negative piece to it. However, I see feedback as accountability, um, and being open in communication to talk about both challenges and successes, and to hold one another to a certain like ethical conduct.
Yeah, that's true. Um, I'm just trying to think of how I wanted to piggyback that piece too, because it's just really an onion. And when I know our goal was and is, as we move forward, is the teamwork aspect, which again is
Mhm.
another value that we'll go more into, again all intertwined. And that onion really is in order to have that full onion, if there's so many layers underneath it. And with feedback, as you're saying, it's being direct. And if it's not clear enough for the other person to be accountable to, for example, to say, am I understanding? That's that
Mhm.
reflection piece that we've been working on for 5 years of like, it's not really quite clear to me what you're trying to say, and to ask for clarity. And then vice versa, the person giving the feedback to really think of a definition, and that it's measurable and that it's clear, and to ask also, does that are you picking up what I'm trying to say, and does that clear to you? So it really is both part. It's a teamwork, communication, um integrity piece, and that would be accountability on both parts. Because I know this is kind of silly, but kind of the same. Even when you're in somebody is rear-ended in an accident, your insurance still even though you're the person that may have rear-ended the other person, you're still even, or I'm sorry, am I saying that backwards? No, the one that got rear-ended, they still hold you accountable, even though you might have had nothing to do with it because you were a part of that accident. They still, it might be 5%, it might be 1%, it might be 10%, but they still say you were there. Maybe did you brake too hard? Did you, I mean, it's happened to us. We've been rear-ended and we were still held accountable in that because you're simply there. So there's always accountability on two parties, is what I'm trying to say. So if there's feedback, if there's any kind of relationship or partnership, which everybody in the company is, you're still accountable no matter what piece you are. Does that communicate and does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes into a team. So like you're there um regardless of like, yeah, what side or how you come to be a part of that, you are. And so each person has a certain responsibility to take ownership of certain actions. Um I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, I just think sometimes people only think about themselves and how like they're accountable for their action when we are accountable for others' actions at some level. It obviously can vary up and down. I totally get that. At some point, it is on that person's plate for sure, and it's their but as team members and as leaders, and we definitely need to make sure we're following up and we're checking those boxes. And if not, what happens? How do we move forward? How do we pivot? How do we make a person as successful as we can? I guess is what I'm saying. So there is accountability on us. And then when we grow, because we're constantly growing, this is we've talked about this for many years now, is how do we take our team with us together and accountability with that communication of okay, so now we have another layer, for example, we have different leaders, we have different fill in the blank, right? How do we make that successful and how do we communicate and be accountable for those levels? So that's something I think we're in right now is those accountability levels of how do we make each level successful and how do we pivot and move forward with another layer of growth, which again we talked about last week or last podcast was growth mindset, right? That was the last one.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big piece of that is growth mindset. We're always growing. That is a very important value to Sonnenberg and to us. And so I think that's why we chose accountability next for today is that they're hand in hand, of course, because with growth mindset, there's a lot of, okay, how are you growing, Nicole? What's your piece? How are you accountable in that piece of growth? And Farah, how are you accountable to make the people that you're leading and the company successful? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, when you're growing in any like position or area or for yourself, there when you're fostering learning and growth, you're also acknowledging mistakes and seeking ways to learn and grow from those areas. And that is an aspect of accountability, to take responsibility for both successes and for things that didn't go maybe the way that you intended them to go. And I think that fosters trust among other individuals on the team too, to be able to take accountability and to look at those and say, okay, I can grow from this and I can continue. I think as part of growth, like you live, like kind of like we talked about last time, I believe, is that you live in this like uncomfortable space a little bit because you're going to make mistakes, and things are not going to always go as planned, and you put yourself out there, and that can be scary. Um, However, I think the important piece of accountability is that it can drive performance and it can continue that growth further.
For sure. I like the piece of being uncomfortable, like we talked about last time, because accountability, you really sit in a lot of uncomfortable, especially when it doesn't go the way that you wanted it to.
Mm-hmm.
That is super uncomfortable and can be super frustrating, especially if, let's say, I was trying to achieve a certain goal and, it's a lot of growth for myself. It could be me letting go of um a, something that I was formally heading, so I was leading a project or a KPI or something, some sort of data driven maybe, or just goal. Maybe it is a culture piece that I really wanted to do. That's an area that I'm really passionate about, and it didn't work out the way that I wanted it to. That's a lot of accountability to have sit on your lap of we didn't achieve that. I'm really disappointed. I'm very frustrated. It's much easier to say, Nicole, um, James, Emily, whoever, right? Like Charmaine, whoever, like like you didn't do this, because it's hard to say like, okay, what am I accountable for? Or what boundary didn't I set or communicate? Or, oh, okay, so this happened. All right, we learned that that didn't work. We tried that, or I let go of too much, or I didn't check in enough, or it's much easier to deflect and blame. And I think those are where we've got to look at boundaries and how we continue to support each other and be accountable for each other, I think is the big jump. And I think that's definitely where we're at. But in relation to tax, same with you. Where when you move up a level, for example, what are you being accountable for at each level? So if we start from the beginning level, I can't remember that's the onboarding like level and beginning is what are you accountable in those beginning stages? What's the thing that we want you to continue to carry up the level? So level one, level two, to A, to B, three, and so on and so forth is what we talk about it constantly. You can't lose it. You can't drift away from some of those core um, values and accountability being one of them, which would be what, Nicole, been really important to us that we really want techs to hold on to as they move forward.
Yeah, and we looked at the levels too as a piece of like, okay, so what pieces of that do we take accountability for and making sure that it is clear that the purpose of them is to is to keep each experience throughout them and hold on to that. So examples of that are like our policies. So like if that you have the policies and you've met the policy and can do the process in level one, then we would want you to hold those throughout the levels because it's like it's building on skill and it's growth. So when you get to level four, if you lose the policies or you're not following those processes, then there's not growth there. And so really they need to build off of each other so that you grow more and more and more and you learn more and more and more. So the policies are something too that like, let's say we didn't have accountability in holding policies and accountability is two-sided too. It's like, what are we accountable for holding the policies to a certain standard? And what is the other person's accountability to follow those processes and policies? So it kind of goes that bi-directionality piece in there. And if you didn't, let's say there was no accountability and you didn't uphold people to certain standards and policies, then there would be no growth and then there would be no communication. So the value structure would kind of fall at that point.
I like that. Yeah, that makes sense. So for like converting, for example. That's one that we talk about every day, all day,
Mhm.
constantly. And to those of you that are joining us, converting is your timesheet. It's turning in your timesheet is what it is. We do it electronically. But just in case we have people watching that are, our 3 followers out there. When we're converting our timesheets, it's just putting in our note. We have to turn it into insurance basically with all of the stuff that we need. That's really important. That's why it's one of our top things from the minute you're hired is you need to make sure that when you go in there, you have the right code, the note, everything looks a little different for depending on, if you're a tech, RBT, senior, BCBA, et cetera, admin, that is from the beginning. And then when you go to and you graduate to the next level, that you're still holding that. You're still accountable for that timesheet. That doesn't just go away and you can, oh, sorry, it's within 24 hours. Really, it should be by the end of your shift. We do give a leeway just in case something were to happen. Like you had a, explosive behavior or you got sick or whatever it may be. But that's the accountability piece is that we give a little buffer and that it needs to be done. And that once you go to the next level, you bring that with you, that you're still accountable for that piece. Some of the other ones in the beginning are, just showing up on time and being there. That's accountability. We're one-on-one with clients. And when somebody doesn't show up or calls after 7, it throws the entire schedule off. One person calling in at 7:45 or 8 o'clock, or I know Nicole, it's been at 8:15, or whatever, or they don't show up or whatever happens. That doesn't affect just that kid or that client. It affects sometimes dozens of people, depending on what that looks like in that day. And, and it affects that parent. We've had parents pull up and we're like, we don't know, like, I'm so sorry, and I know that not everybody understands that piece. It affects the parents. We've had parents get in trouble with their work because that has happened. So accountability is a huge piece for parents too. Parents being accountable. It's another side. That's that boundary. That's that relationship, right, Nicole, with parents being accountable for bringing their kids and being a part of treatment and engaged and goals. Uh, can you speak a little bit to that too? Because I didn't even think about that piece. There's a big accountability piece to that.
Yeah, it's a whole team effort. And when you're treating individuals, you are looking at like the whole person. You're not just looking at like a piece of them. So it's not just that they come to ABA and then they're done for the day. It's also, well, what happens when there's not ABA because it's not built to be a long-term service. And so what part do the parents and the guardians play for that individual in upholding certain skills that are being taught and being able to work in natural environment settings and teach in their homes or in the community. And so there's a piece that the parents or guardians play as well as the ABA team. And both have to kind of come together, and both are held to the same policies or very similar policies and practices for the best interests of the client. And when there's a break in that accountability, then there's a break, just like I said earlier, then there's a break in communication, and then there's a break in growth and progress. And there's a break in sometimes like decision making and things like that. So you kind of got to keep it all together so that the accountability and that everybody is following certain pieces of that child's programming or individual's programming to foster like learning and growth well-roundedly.
Yeah, every time I think there's a new value that I'm like, oh, we should add that, it always comes back to our core values that we already have. It
Mm-hmm.
really does. There was one the other day. I was like, oh, that would be a good one to add. And like, not really, because that's communication. That's growth mindset. That is being accountable, And so
Mm-hmm.
I think what we have talked about and what we really want to hone in today for our staff, for families, for really society is it's not just, again, owning up to and saying, owning up to is not the right word, but saying like, oh yeah, look at what I did. Look at what, I did show up on time. Well, that's great. That is part of the team, right? But it also is, did you and your teammate, on your track or in your room, how are we making each other accountable? How are we showing up and being excited and changing the environment for the better? Showing up when you see somebody that's struggling or not understanding something, maybe a company policy, maybe, I mean, you name it. There's lots of things in ABA and lots of moving parts every single day. And talking to them. And I see you've come a few minutes late. What's going on? Is there something that I can do? I used to struggle with that, or I've seen other people struggle with that. What can we do? Oh, I'm at Pleasant Prairie and I have to park far away. Oh, let me give you a trick. Or when they're leaving, they're stuck in the parking lot. A lot of people I'm hearing like, we don't like the parking lot. We like to park on the street because we can get out of here.
Mm-hmm.
There's just things that you don't think of, maybe that other people can help you with. So if you see that your teammates and or a family, you see a family that's struggling and they're showing up late. Maybe it's talk to your supervisor. Hey, so and so is showing up late. It's not just to get them in trouble, it's how can we help them so that they can, maybe they're having trouble getting shoes on their kid or eating or getting them up or, fill in the blank. So how can we help others so that they can be successful? That's also accountability. It also falls on each other with that when you see your teammate maybe struggling a little bit, and that how do you change that environment and make it successful? I think that's a big one for me is when people join in to the chaos or the destruction of something's not going well. How can you put you a part of the solution versus part of the problem? I think that's also accountability. What's your thoughts on that? We kind of talked a little bit about that, but that's a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you choose to look the other way or ignore certain situations or not ask the questions, then are you are you fostering like ownership and responsibility? Because we talked about how each person plays a role in each situation. So looking away from that, what does that do to like other team members, and how does that build trust and
There's that word
connection with
again.
others? Yeah,
Trust.
yeah. It would
So
be very easy to look the other way in instances. And that's not the culture that we've built either. And I think there's a lot of self reflection in accountability, like to look inward and say, how can I take part, whether big, small, it doesn't matter. It's that regardless, you're a part.
And that is our definition of teamwork. You're a part of the whole, I believe, is part of our
Mm-hmm.
definition. So that really plays into the accountability piece, is you are a part of the whole. And what piece can you be accountable? Um, so if Nicole is, struggling at one area, and what's my accountability and what's my piece of that? And how can I make, Nicole, for example, successful in that area? How do we pivot? Or how do we add? Or how do I make, how can I help? really, at the end of the day, is how can I help? How can I help move us forward within that? So I think that that is how you take next steps. I think that's how you bring teammates that see that piece, that you are a piece of the whole, and how
Mhm.
you're accountable for your piece, which we'll get into next, in the next coming months. I'm not sure which one we're doing next, but if we were to do teamwork, that would be a good segue into teamwork or communication. What's your piece,
Mhm.
right? What's your accountability in that piece of communication and growth mindset? Equitable access. That's a one that people really struggle with too. Right?
Mhm.
It's what's your accountability in that? How do you help somebody be successful within, the access of whatever it is that you're trying to step forward with your teammate. Yeah, that's a lot of talking about one word. I guess I'm good at I like to ramble too. So what else, Nicole? What else do you see in accountability? Is there anything else?
I I mean, I see accountability as responsibility. So in any situation, engaging in a self-reflection of what's my responsibility in this. So if I'm struggling, let's say, my responsibility would be to come to you and communicate to you that I'm struggling in this area and essentially ask for help. Like that would be my part. Um, and your responsibility or your part in that may be to be present and to see that there's a struggle and to ask and to get in communication, um because all of that together would then foster teamwork, which we could talk about in one of our other podcasts. But
Yeah. I want to make sure I talk like piggyback on the self-reflection piece because you've said that a few times and I think that's super important is that is accountability
mhm.
in a nutshell
Yeah.
is you're reflecting on your actions and all the other values we just talked about of how was I accountable? How was Nicole accountable? How was this person accountable? And where are those boundaries and how do we hold hands within the team, but also have our lanes and how does that affect others? So that is a lot of self-reflection on everybody's piece.
Mhm.
And we might have different opinions. That's okay. We are going to have different perspectives. That's why we have so many team members and so many leaders because we each hold our part. But it is self-reflection. I think that's really a great way to summarize what accountability is can you self-reflect? And step one might be just not in the moment, and that's okay. It might be it has to happen, and then you need help even. Like, Nicole, help me self-reflect on that. I want to walk myself through this. And then we do it, right? And then it might be the goal would be as we're communicating right now and we're talking about a topic, I'm thinking about it and reflecting as we move through this because that's how you come to and you work as in teamwork and growth, equitable access, uh, pragmatic thinking, all of our values as you're doing it, so you can come to the best outcome based off of all of your team coming together to get to a conclusion, right? Whatever that is. So I think that really summarizes it quite beautifully, honestly, is once you can do that in the moment, it really is helpful for accountability of, with all of that. What do you think? Do you agree? I think that's kind of what you
Yeah.
said.
Mhm.
So I think that's a really a good place to end is that self-reflection piece. We keep hearing that, and we've really worked hard in the last 5 years to move forward with that. And so Yeah. I'm accountable. And you're accountable
Yeah.
most of the time, right? We do
Most
our
of the
we do our best.
time.
And then we reflect back and say, "Oh, I wasn't accountable for that."
Uh-huh.
So
That
so
part.
that
Yeah.
also occurs. But anyway, well, thank you for joining us for our second value podcast on the scoop for accountability. And we will see you next time. Bye.